Okay, so today's daf is daf Yud in Eruvin, and we're starting on daf Tet Amud Bet, where we left off yesterday. And the issue that was introduced in the Gemara yesterday was the question of a lechi that is what's called nir'a mi bachutz v'shaveh mi bivnim, which means it can be seen from people by people standing outside of the mavoi, but it can't be seen by people standing inside. In other words, if you're standing inside the mavoi, it just seems like whatever there is flush with the wall, so you can't see it. But from the perspective of somebody facing the opening of the mavoi, somebody outside facing in, they will see that there's a protrusion, there's some kind of a lechi, there's some kind of an extra protrusion there, indicating that it's separated off from the main thoroughfare, from the Reshut HaRabim. So this was the principle that was introduced, and the Gemara raised an objection to this, and the objection was from a case that we know that Hatzer Ketana Shenifretza Ligdola, Gdola Muteret Uktana Asura, that it said that if there's a small courtyard that shares a wall with a large courtyard, and this wall is broken through, there's what's called the Pirza. Now what happens is, because the small courtyard is narrower than the large courtyard, so you have to imagine the walls of the small courtyard, in other words, the opening of the small courtyard, the fourth side, let's call it, is a wall that is shared with an adjoining courtyard, but the adjoining courtyard is much wider, it's much bigger. So if you're standing in the small courtyard, all you see is open space in front of you. It's now become a three-walled courtyard because the entire fourth wall of the small courtyard is gone, but there's more to the wall because the large courtyard is bigger than the small courtyard. So in other words, the fourth wall of the small courtyard was a part of the large courtyard's wall. So from the perspective of somebody standing in the small courtyard, all you see is a big hole on that side. There's no wall at all on the fourth side. But if you were standing in the large courtyard, you would see part of a wall on your left, part of a wall on your right, and a big opening into the small courtyard. Okay? So that's the way. So do you see what I'm saying? So the small courtyard is narrow. It's narrow. Its fourth wall is over here. Okay? But really there's more wall to the right and left, just that you can't see it because you're in the narrow courtyard. There's more wall because there's a big courtyard right in front of you. You just can't see it. This is the wall of the big courtyard. Okay? This is the wall of the big courtyard. This is you. You're in this courtyard. Here's your walls. You see where your walls are? So can you see to the right that there's a wall over here? No, because you have a wall here blocking you. Can you see to the left that there's a wall over here? No. No, your fourth wall is a part of a much bigger wall, but you can't see that it's part of a much bigger wall. You only see what's in front of you.
You only see the part of it that's your wall.
I see. Let's say you put your sukkah's fourth wall, you rest it against the house. Yeah. When you're sitting in the sukkah, all you can see is a part of your house wall. That's not the entire house. Okay? Really, there's more house to the right and there's more house to the left. Gotcha. Okay. Right? But you can't see it. Okay, so imagine that's a good example that we can relate to. That's the way it works. So that's what we're talking about here. Now, what's the issue? The issue is, well, maybe we should say that the leftover wall to the right that you can't see and the leftover wall to the left that you can't see really should count as lechayayim. Really, it's like having a lechi that you can't see because there's a protrusion from. Now, what do you have? You don't have a chatzer anymore. You have like a mavoi. It's more similar to an alley because the fourth wall is open, right? So you need something indicating that you can't carry beyond your own chatzer, because you can't carry from your small chatzer into the large one, because you don't have an eruv with that chatzer, you don't have a relationship with them. So you can't carry out of your chatzer now. It's similar to the mavoi in the sense that you can't carry from where you are into the other place. So you need some lechi, some reminder that you won't do that. So the question is, can this reminder serve? Because really, if one were to look from the large courtyard, they would see the two walls of their courtyard with a big breach in it, and now an entrance into your courtyard. But from your perspective, what do you see? Just a big hole. You don't see that there's walls to the right or left.
Inside you see no reminder, you have to go outside.
You have to go outside to see it. So bringing from that, so what are they saying? They're saying, so you see from this that what? That if you can't see the lechi from inside your courtyard, right, then it doesn't count. Because you see that the people in the small courtyard, they're not allowed to carry. Okay? So it's good proof, right? So then the Gemara had said that, and we had left it with a cliffhanger last time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the bottom on Tet Amud Bet. So the Gemara had said, so according to this, if we're going to say that a lechi that you can't see from the inside is good, then this small courtyard should be fine. Because even though they can't see that they have protrusions coming from their wall, they really do. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Zera says, V'nichnasin kod lektana ligdola. We must say that, what are we talking about here? Where it's not that the courtyard, the small courtyard, is flush with the large courtyard. In other words, it's not that it shares a wall with the large courtyard. It actually extends into the large courtyard. So in other words, the way that it works is that this courtyard, the small courtyard, actually is almost a...
In other words, it's not this, it extends.
It's not that imagine your sukkah, the sukkah case again. So it's not that the sukkah is resting on the outside wall of your house. It's that the sukkah goes into the house and uses your living room wall, let's say. Or it's closed, or it's closed.
And it goes in.
It goes, part of it protrudes into the larger courtyard. Let me see if they have a picture here to show you. What? Yeah. It's not that complicated compared to the other cases, really, but it might sound that way. So let me just give you a nice picture to look at. Hold on. But basically what it's saying is it would be as if your sukkah had 4 walls, but the 4th wall is actually situated inside your house. Imagine the sukkah, right? So when the 4th wall breaks, you're in the house. In other words, it's not that the 4th wall is the house wall, it's that the 4th wall of your sukkah is resting in the house. Imagine that.
It's going to be part of the bigger courtyard.
Exactly, in a way, but they were sealed off. So, because this small courtyard's exit is somewhere else. Only one of its ends reaches into the large courtyard. The other end is outside. So the real way into the courtyard, in and out of the courtyard, is outside of the premises of the large courtyard, but part of it juts in, overlaps with the big courtyard. So I don't like the picture that they have of it because I don't find it that helpful. It's a little bit, you can see it here. They have basically the walls of the small courtyard are inside.
Right.
And this is the one that's broken.
Yeah, there's the
see?
same picture in here.
Right, this one's broken, right.
Match what you were saying, that's what I was confused.
Right, do you see though? In other words, its walls are, this is the open wall. It's inside the big courtyard. Just this part of it is inside the big courtyard. This is the wall that's been breached.
I see.
Okay? So now when you come in, you're actually inside the big courtyard.
So you don't see what's there.
You don't, right, but look, you can't use the walls of the big courtyard as a lechi. Why not? Because they're actually behind the end of your walls. They're not here. If they were here, like we originally thought, in other words, if the 4th wall of the small courtyard is the same, like here, as the 4th wall of the courtyard.
Right.
Okay? And just that the courtyard has more to it. So from the big courtyard, there's a piece sticking out, and where you are in the small courtyard, you don't see anything. That, you could say, is a lechi. But if the walls of the courtyard actually extend in, so at the ends of your walls, there's nothing now. It's completely gone.
Because your whole
4th wall was inside, and it was completely gone. And it's not attached to the walls of the large courtyard. It was just inside them, but it wasn't attached. So it's not going to help you. There's no piece on the right and piece on the left. Okay? So now the Gemara says, okay, if that's the case then, velema lavud v'tishtereh. So why don't you say that maybe this small courtyard, even though it doesn't share a wall with the large courtyard, but still its walls are within 3 tifachim of the walls of the large courtyard, let's assume. Like in that picture, they're pretty close to the walls of the large courtyard. So if that's the case, we can say that, we say that any space less than 3 tefachim is like it's filled. It's like an extension, it's like it's filled. So why can't that be the lechi then? Why can't that be your extensions? So the Gemara says again, so it says, V'chi temad demipalgei tuva. Maybe you'll tell me that it's too far from the walls. In other words, it's more than 3 tefachim, so therefore it can't be, we can't make an imaginary extension either. V'tanei Rav Ada bar Avimi kamed Rabbi Chanina, that Rav Ada bar Avimi said before Rabbi Chanina, ketana ba'eser gedola b'achat esrei. That actually what we are talking about is a case, this small courtyard is only 1 amah less than the large courtyard. The large one is 11 amot wide. The small one is 10 amot wide. So that means that on the right side there's 3 tefachim, and on the left side there's exactly 3 tefachim. So that would mean that basically you should have extensions on the side. Halachically speaking, imagine in our imagination, legally, we say that the walls of that small courtyard merge with the walls of the large courtyard, and that should be your lechi. That should be your extension that you need to permit it. If we are allowing extensions that you can't see from inside the courtyard, then we should allow this, right? Makes sense. Okay. So now, Amar Ravina says, B'muflagin mikotel zeh b'shnayim, umikotel zeh b'daled. Nope. I'm going to get around it because what do you have? A total of 6 tefachim. You're saying it's 3 on the right and 3 on the left. I'm going to say no, it's 4 and 2. It's 4 and 2. So therefore, it's you're not going to have you're not going to be close enough. You're only going to be close enough on one side, but not on the other.
It's only one side.
Exactly. So what do you need 2? You only need 1, right? So the answer is we turn to Yud Amud Aleph. Rabbihi de Amar ba'enan shenei pasin. According to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, we're following his opinion. He says for a chatzer you need 2. When you have a courtyard, you need 2. For a mavoy, they were lenient and they let you have just 1. For a courtyard, you need 2. So there you'll only have 1. And remember, these are courtyards open to each other. This is not a mavoy, this is a courtyard. So it's not enough to have only one side within 3 tfachim. You have to have both sides within to be able to say. So even if we're going to count the ones that we can't see from the inside, right, we still won't be able to do it.
And halacha l'maaseh, we don't rely on lechi only, right? Halacha.
We don't have a mavoy anyway.
No,
so.
but I mean,
If you had a case of a mavoy,
it would not be just a lechi. It would have to be.
we usually do a doorpost or something. Yeah, we do Yitzrat HaBetach usually. Yeah. So the Tanya, as we learned in the Braita, Chatzer Niteret Bapas Ehad. According to the Tanakh Kama, one side post is enough to permit the Chatzer. But according to Rabbi Omer, b'shnei pasin, you need 2. So therefore, what are we saying? We're saying that here we're talking about a case where you need 2, and therefore we cannot refute the idea that, in theory, were this small courtyard to be situated such that it had exactly 3 tefachim distance on both sides from the large courtyard's walls, we would say that it actually had 2 lechayayim. It actually had 2 of these necessary side posts, even though they're not visible from the inside. Okay? And we would allow you to carry in the small courtyard, but we are talking about, according to this, we're going according to Rabbi. The reason why you can't carry inside the small courtyard is because you only have one side close enough. So, but really, what is it saying? It's saying we could maintain the position that the invisible lechi, in other words, something that you can't see from inside, still is acceptable. It's just that this case doesn't meet the criteria for having 2 side posts, which is what we require for a courtyard. Okay?
This may not that important, but how does from the outside, how does that serve as a lechi? I don't understand.
Because if you're standing in the large courtyard, you're going to see that there are 2 sides.
But how does it serves a reminder for what?
For the people outside going into it. This is a whole machloket. This is a whole issue. In other words, is it enough that you know that it's there and the people and it's visible, right, or does it have to be that you can actually see it when you're inside the small chatzer?
That's the same with the mavui and
Now, obviously, if you didn't know it was there, if the people inside the small chatzer didn't know it was there, they wouldn't be able to rely on it. So we're obviously assuming that they know it's there, they just can't see it when they're inside. Okay, so it's not serving as a reminder physically that they can see it, but that they know it's there.
In other words, they see that, they say, okay, it's not Rashut Arabi.
That's how it's supposed to work. That they know the difference between the place where they can carry and where they can't carry. Right. Yeah. So this is what we said so far. So we're maintaining still this idea that we could still preserve the concept of the invisible lechi, or the lechi that you can't see from inside the enclosure. It's still valid. So the Tanya, as we said, we said that already. Okay, so wait a second. There's a big problem with the whole way that you learned this. The Gemara is going to say that we can't accept this whole train of reasoning. Why? Because amrat bishlamani rabi bachutz v'shaveh mibifnim. Let's say eno nidon mishum lechi. Let's operate with the premise. So what it's going to do is it's going to construct the argument according to two different premises and see which one works out. So let's say that we were to assume that if you can't see the side posts from inside the mavoy, it's no good, or from inside the chatzer, it's no good. Let's assume that. So then everything works out nicely. Ve'Rebbi savar la keRebbi Yosei. And Rabbi holds like Rabbi Yosei, who says that there's actually a minimum measurement for each one of the side posts. When it comes to a chatzer, it has to be, or when it comes to, you always have to have a lechi, any lechi that you use, whether it's a chatzer or it's a mavoy, you need 3 tefachim of a lechi. It has to be a width of 3 tefachim. Okay, so let's assume that Rabbi is holding that way, and we're saying that invisible lechayayim are not good. Not good. Let's operate with that view for a second. Then what we can say is udi Rabbi zera udi Ravina leta mishum achi ketana ba'eser ugdola be'achatesrei mishum de Rabbi savar like Rabbi Yosei. So everything works out nicely. If we dismiss what Ravina and Rabbi Zera were saying, was they were trying to create additional complications in the case. We're talking about where the walls of the small courtyard actually protrude into the large courtyard. And we're talking about where it's not evenly centered, so it's a little bit to the side, so only one of them is close enough. That's why it doesn't count. That's what they were trying to say, right? But let's just make it simple. Let's just say it doesn't count at all. And what are we talking about? We're talking about where the opening is centered. And we're not talking about where the small courtyard protruded. We're talking about what we originally thought we were talking about, which is where the fourth wall of each of the chatzerot is shared. Just that the small one shares a little bit less. So then it makes sense, the Gemara says, that the Braita mentions that there's only a 1 amma difference between the small courtyard and the big courtyard. Why does it make sense? Because since there's only a 1 amma difference, that means you have 3 tefachim to the left and 3 tefachim to the right. And what would that mean? That would mean that if you're in the large courtyard, you have 2 perfectly good lechayayim, because you have 3 tefachim to your right and you have 3 tefachim to your left. And if you're in the small courtyard, what do you have? Nothing, because we're assuming that if you can't see it, it's not there. So that makes perfect sense then. If we assume the simplest, without any of the complicated stuff, we just assume, you know what, we're talking about a case where the wall was shared. There's 3 tefachim to your right, 3 tefachim to your left. If you're inside the courtyard, you see 2 lechayayim in the big one. If you're in the small courtyard, you don't see anything. And that's why you can carry in the big courtyard, but you can't carry in the small courtyard. It makes perfect sense.
Just ask another basic question.
Okay.
And I apologize because I think I missed a couple, and that's why I'm not good. Why is it a problem to carry from that to the big courtyard?
They don't share, since they didn't share any space before, they don't have Eruvei Chatzerot. No, you need between 2 Chatzerot you have to have an Eruv also, but it's not a physical Eruv. You have to have a what's called Eruvei Chatzerot to be able to carry.
Allowed to carry from that
one Chatzer to another unless they have a shared Eruv. Well, it's just, essentially, rabbinically, but you're not allowed to carry from one chatzer to another chatzer unless there is a relationship between the 2 chatzerot that they made.
The entire thing is within one
perimeter, yeah. They have to have some. They have to have some relationship. Yeah, that's the reason. So that's a separate problem, though. Here we're just talking about even within the small courtyard, since you can't carry to the large one, and there's nothing reminding you where the end of this courtyard is, because you don't see anything. That's why you can't even carry in the small one, because it's just open now. It's so from the large courtyard's perspective, there's a clear demarcation where you can't go. You see? So it's better for them.
So we just proved what?
So what the Gemara is saying is they're trying to work. They're running all the data according to 2 sets of premises. Okay, the first set of premises that we started out with, which works out perfectly. So now the Gemara is going to say, but what about the other set of premises? So now let's switch for a second and go back to the new set and see if the data runs just as well, basically. So let's try this. But if we say If we say like this, let's take the opinion that even if you can't see the lechayayim, they do count. Okay, let's say they do count. And then what do we have to do in order to preserve our case? So then the only way we're going to be able to salvage our case is, first of all, we're going to have to say that the walls of the small courtyard protrude into the large courtyard. Right? Otherwise, we would have the invisible lechayayim. And we're also going to have to say that it's not centered. Right? That it's shifted to the side, because if it's in the middle, then you'll still have lechayayim that are invisible, because you'll be within 3 tefachim on the right and 3 tefachim on the left. So we have to shift it to the side. That's what Ravina said. So we're going to assume all these extra pieces of information. We're going to assume that the walls of the small actually protrude in, that one side is close enough, but one side is too distant. It's 4 tefachim. It's too distant for there to be a lechi on that side, and therefore you're lacking one of the lechayayim. And so that's what we're assuming. And then we're going to say, V'Rebbi lo savar la ki Rebbi Yosei. You're also going to have to say, according to this, that Rebbi, Yehuda Hanasi, does not hold that you need 3 tefachim for a lechi. Why not? Because if he holds that you need 3 tefachim for a lechi, then how can you carry in the large courtyard? If you're in the large courtyard, you're going to see a lechi of 4 tefachim on one side, and only 2 on the other side. That's not going to be good. So we're going to have to say he doesn't hold like Rabbi Yosei then. He holds that even a small lechi is good enough. So from the large courtyard you will see 4 and 2. From the small courtyard you won't see anything, but you only actually have 1. Because only the side where there's 2 tefachim is close enough to the large wall for it to count as lavud, that it's going to count as if there's an extension there. And on the side that there's a space of 4, it's going to be too far. Your side's going to be too far. Okay, so that's what we're going to have so far. So then the question is, we have one piece of data that isn't going to fit. So this works fine so far, because we understand, if you're in the large courtyard, why are you able to carry? Because you have 2 side posts. One is small and one is big, but it doesn't matter according to the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi apparently. And if you're inside the courtyard, the small one, you cannot carry. Why can't you carry? Because you actually only have 1 side post, because on the side that you are 4 tefachim from the big wall, that your wall is too far from the big wall, it's not considered connected, and therefore it's not considered a side post. So the small courtyard basically only has 1 side post. The big courtyard, you'll see 2 side posts. So that's why you can carry in the big and not in the small. Okay? So that's what the Gemara is saying so far. Now, but here's where the problem is. But if that's the case, why then? There's one piece of data, there's one data point that doesn't fit, which is that the Braita specifically tells us that the relative lengths of or widths of the courtyard is 11 amot and 10 amot. In other words, there's only a 1 amah difference between the large and the small. Meaning that if it were evenly distributed, it would be 3 and 3. If it's not, then it could be 4 and 2 or 5 and 1. It doesn't matter. But the point is that it's telling you that there's only a 1 amah difference between the 2. Now, why is it telling me that then? According to this, why is it telling me that? It could be anything. Because because if all the Braita wants to tell you is the permissibility of carrying in the large one, even if there was a difference of 2 tefachim, it wouldn't matter. Right? Even if you had a 2 tefachim difference. Because you just told me that we don't care how big the side posts are. So if I'm standing in if I'm standing in the big courtyard, as long as there's a little bit of a side post that I see next to the small courtyard, and a little bit of a side post that I see next to the other side of this small courtyard, I'm good. So so for that you don't need it to be 1 amah difference. Even 1 tefach difference would be good. But if we're talking about from the small standpoint, if we're looking at it, and if we're talking about from the small courtyard, imagine you're in the small courtyard. Does it matter how big the big courtyard is? It's prohibited anyway, right? Let's say it's 10 million. It doesn't matter. So from the big courtyard, you see walls of 10 million, 5 million on each side. And from the small courtyard, okay, you're too far from those, you're too far. So it's not going to help you. It's not going to matter how big the courtyard is because you're too far from the side. You broke in, and now you're a million away and a million away. It doesn't matter if you're 4 tefachim or a million. No, it doesn't matter. The point is that you're too far away from the sides to your right and left of the large courtyard for it to help you serve as an extension for your walls. So why does it mention it's exactly an amah? Why does it have to make the case that it's exactly an amah? It seems like that's important, right? But it's not important from the perspective of the big courtyard, because any amount difference would be good enough for the big courtyard as long as there's something there on either side left.
Well, the thing that they kept consistent is that if the total is 6, like 4.
Right, but why is the question? That's what the Gemara is bothered by. That's what the Gemara is bothered by. In other words, because from the large courtyard's perspective, that's not important. Because any number on either side would be good. Once you throw away that it has to be exactly 3, right? So then any number is good. It doesn't matter anymore. It could be 1 tefach. And if you're looking from the small courtyard's perspective, and you're asking, why is it that this small courtyard is prohibited? Okay, and we're assuming again that even though you can't see the lechi from inside, it would still count. So what does it matter how much bigger or how far the courtyard wall is from your wall? Why does it matter? In other words, as long as it's more than 3 tefachim, it's going to be good enough.
No, but it's still
even on one side. Even on one.
If it's more than that, it's not.
But we're prohibiting. We don't want the extension. That's all. In other words,
but then it becomes irrelevant. Then it's not because what we're talking about is an extension.
I know that, but that's the whole problem. In other words, why did the Braita tell us that it has to be exactly, that we're talking about a case of exactly 1 amah? If it doesn't matter. Right, if it doesn't even matter. Because if before, like the way we learned before, that it has to be exactly 3 and 3 for it to work, because you need the lechayayim to be 3. Okay, and even though they're 3, still inside the small chatzer you're not going to be able to carry because you can't see them. So fine. But if you're telling me that you can see them, and therefore we have to say that no, really the small courtyard protrudes into the large courtyard and it's off center, you're going to say that anyway. So why do we have to say it's exactly the number 6 tefachim? Why can't it be 5 million tefachim? What do we care? Okay, it couldn't be that many, because there is a limit on the amount of breach that you can have in the large courtyard. But it doesn't. But you can have much more. Why is it telling you that it has to be exactly 1 amah? Why does it make the case that way? Right. So that's the problem. So therefore, what do you see? Rather, we must conclude that if it is. If you cannot see the lechayayim from inside the small chatzer, they're insignificant. They don't count. You must conclude that, because that's why the case had to be exactly an amah difference between the small chatzer and the big chatzer. That's why it had to be, because there's 3 on one side and 3 on the other side. It is centered. It doesn't protrude in. And if you're standing in the big chatzer, you see 2, 3 tefach wide posts, and if you're in the small chatzer, you don't see anything, and that's why you're not allowed to carry in the small chatzer, but you are allowed to carry in the big chatzer. In other words, the first way that we ran the data fits smoothly. All the data points line up and they make sense. Once we start bringing in Ravina and Rabbi Zerah and these cases where no, it protrudes in and it's not centered, so then the question becomes, why do you need the exact measurement then if it's not centered? And therefore the Gemara says we dismiss that and we say that what do you see? That lechayayim that you can't see, the way that we originally thought, lechayayim that you can't see when you're in the small chatzer do not count. You have to be able to see them. And since in this case you're not going to see them, you can't count. You can't carry in the small chatzer. So now the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Lo shemi ali hashematita. Rav Yosef suffered from what would seem to be Alzheimer's or some other memory issues or something like that when he got older. And so Rav Yosef was Abaye's teacher. But oftentimes in the Talmud, he will ask Abaye, I don't remember this halacha. And Abaye will tell him, oh yeah, you taught us this. Or he'll say, I never heard this before. And he'll say, yes, you did. You even taught it to us, but you forgot. So he forgot a lot of the things that he learned or that even that he himself taught earlier in his life. So he says, I never heard this before. And Amar le Abai says, yes, At Amrat Nialan, you actually taught it to us. Ve'aha Amrat Nialan, and it was in the following context. The Amar Rabbi Bar Abba, that Rami Bar Abba said, Amar Rav Huna, that Rav Huna said, Lechi Amoshech im dofno shel mavoi pachot midalad amot nidon mishum lechi umishtamesh im chudo apenimi dalad amot nidon mishum mavoi va'asor lishtamesh bechudo. What we're talking about here would seem to be that you have a mavoi that has two, that you have the back is sealed. We're talking about mavoi satum. Then you have two walls on the sides. It's sealed on three sides. But the thing is that one wall is longer than the other wall. So what do you have? At the end of the shorter wall, you have a lechi. It's a wide lechi that continues to extend with the line of the wall. So it's added onto the wall. But let's say the wall on this side stops here, and this wall goes all the way to here. Okay? So you fill this in with the lechi. So if the lechi is less than 4 amot, it counts as a lechi. And you can carry all the way up to the inner point of that lechi. But if it's dalit amot, if it's 4 amot in length, so it's considered like a mavoi in its own right.
Here's another thing I don't understand.
Okay.
How can that serve as a lechi since it's a fixture, something that's always there? I mean,
The lechi is always there. No, it's attached there. No, we talked about that already. You can have even if the walls themselves curve around, they can be a lechi.
But then,
It just has to be something to demarcate that this is a separate space. If it's something you walk straight,
demarcate it if it's there all the time.
it's still demarcated. A door is there all the time and it demarcates that it's your house.
It's sticking out.
In other words, you can see it sticking
In
out.
other words, it's not something that.
Let's say you have a kitchen. No. No, it just has to be shaped in a way that indicates that it's a distinct place. So you add this in a case where there's nothing there. Okay? In other words, it's like some people have their kitchen is just a doorway. There's nothing there, but it's still demarcated that you could see that it's a different room. Right? So it's the same thing here. So we're talking about a case where the lechi extends along the wall. Okay? It completes the wall in a way. So normally the lechi would just be sitting there by the side of the wall. Here it actually continues on with the wall and kind of closes completes the gap that would otherwise be there in that hallway.
And it's got to be wider than the wall, than the shorter wall, because that's what's sticky. That's what
It has to protrude a little bit.
So it's like a wider piece of wood.
It has to be placed, I guess, in such a way that you can. But we're going to see that here it's talking about where it's flush with the wall.
Right.
It's flush with the wall. So let me see if they have a picture in the back that we can see exactly here. Hold on, let's see if they have it here. Look. Here he doesn't have it that one wall is shorter than the other, but they have it differently, but some of the Mefarshim say that way. But here, look, see, so it's protruding past. So it protrudes. But if you're standing in the Mavoi, what do you see? Just a long wall.
Right.
If you're standing out here, what do you see? There's obviously a protrusion, right? If you're standing inside the Mavoi, up to this inner point is where you can carry. Okay, because it's protruding past the alleyway. In this picture, it's protruding even into the street.
Right.
So from the perspective of the person standing in here, they just see that the wall is longer on one side than the other.
Except for the fact that it's shorter.
Right.
Over there on the picture,
Right.
it's shorter. It's a bit.
Right. But if you're standing on the outside of the mavoi, you're going to see that there's a piece sticking out that doesn't belong, right?
Yeah.
Compared to the other wall. But if you were inside, you wouldn't see that. You would see that one side was longer than the other. If you're standing here, that's true, but it just looks like the wall is longer.
Right.
It doesn't look like there's something separate.
It's not fatter.
Right, it's not necessarily fatter. Right.
It
It doesn't say that it's fatter. Right. You wouldn't see it except as a longer wall on that side. You wouldn't see it as a separate
And
entity.
that still counts as
And it would
lechi?
still count. So, or that's what it says.
I had it extending the wrong way.
Yeah, normally, no. Normally, you're right. Normally, in the pictures, it's
should
extending
block the
horizontally.
roadway, right.
Yeah. No, you're right. Exactly. It just doesn't here. So now, what does he say about this? He says that Ve'at Amratlan, you taught us Allah about it. Shema mina tzilat. You can learn 3 things from here. Shema mina ben lechayei asur. First of all, you see that in between the lechayayim, in other words, when you are standing right next to whatever the lechi is, you can't carry, like we talked about yesterday. And ushma minam, and you also see meshech mavoi ba'arba, that the size of a mavoi is 4 amot, because you see that if it's 4 amot, that piece of wood is 4 amot, it becomes a mavoi in its own right. It becomes like a separate mavoi. It's no longer considered to be a part of your mavoi, but it's a separate mavoi. And furthermore, nirami b'chutz v'shaveh b'bifnim nidon mishum lechi. You see that even though you can't see it inside the mavoi, it does count, right? Because we just said that could count as a lechi, even though it's flush with the wall from where you see. Now, the reason why the Ritva says actually that you have to say that this mavoi is not like in this picture, but is actually where one wall was originally shorter and the lechi completes it, is how can that lechi by itself be a mavoi in its own right? It wouldn't have any other walls. It would just be sticking out into the street in that picture.
Just a wall.
Right? It's just a wall. So that's why the Ritva says that it's talking about where the other wall matches it too. But it doesn't matter. The point is that from your perspective, it's flush with the wall. From somebody standing outside, they'll see an extension that doesn't belong. Right? They'll notice that it's something different from the wall itself. So he says you can't carry right next to the lechi. You see but even though you can't see that it's a lechi from inside, it still counts. And what do you see from here? You see that what you can see from the outside, even though it's not visible from the inside, still counts as a lechi. That's the halacha. That's halacha. So the Gemara says tiyufta v'hilchita. You just went through this. We started the daf today with an elaborate disproof of this position, right? That, if you assume that invisible lechayayim are good, then you're going to have a problem with the whole case of the small chatzer that protrudes into the large chatzer and all that. So you just told me that, and now you're telling me that's the halacha after we rejected it? So the Gemara says, because in Mishum Detanei Rabbi Chia Kevate, because Rabbi Chia earlier on the previous daf explicitly said that was the halacha. He explicitly brought a braita that said that whether you can only see it from the outside or you can only see it from the inside, it's still good. It just has to be visible from one of the two perspectives, not from both. So since we have an explicit braita that says that, even though we showed that it doesn't fit well with the other case, that's still what the halacha is. And actually, what the Shulchan Aruch does is he holds like the complicated version with Ravina and Rabbi Zera, that the only case where the small chatzer becomes prohibited when it protrudes into the large chatzer is going to be when the walls actually protrude in and they're too far from the sides of the large chatzer. That's the only time that you're not going to be able to carry in the small chatzer. But actually, if the small chatzer and the large chatzer share a wall, and the wall is breached, since you have lechayayim on the right and the left, even though you can only see them from the large chatzer, it's still going to be good, like the way that we rejected before. That ends up being the way that's accepted in the halacha. So now we said, V'harachav me'eser yima'et. It said in the Mishnah, the first Mishnah of the Masekhet, which we still haven't finished explaining, is that if the mavoi is wider than 10 amot, you have to make it smaller. You have to make it narrower. Otherwise, you cannot use the device of a lechi or korah. It's too wide. So the Gemara Amar Abaye says, Tana v'harachav me'eser yima'et. Rabbi Yehuda omer eno tzarich lima'et. That if it's wider than 10 amot, just like we said, if it's taller than 20 amot, it's no good for the korah. If it's wider than 10 amot, it's no good. But Rabbi Yehuda says it's no problem. Even if it's wider than 10 amot, it's still good. Just like he said, even if it's higher than 20 amot, it's still good. So the ad kama, how far? Savar Rav Achai mikamed Rav Yosef lememar ad shalosh ama v'shalish. According to Rav Achai was sitting in front of Rav Yosef and he suggested that it should be up to 13 and a third amot. In other words, it's not that Rabbi Yehuda says that it's infinite. He doesn't say that it can be infinitely wide. He still has a limit. It's just that his limit is not 10 amot, it's 13 and a third amot. Where would he get such a strange number as 13 and a third amot? We're going to see. We learn it from the pasei beraot. What's pasei beraot? Basically, the rabbis had a problem, which was that a well is a reshut yachid. A well is deeper than 10 tefachim. It's 4 by 4 tefachim in its dimensions, and it's walled around. So it's really a private domain. So let's say you want to take water out. Let's say you're traveling and you need to take water out of a well on Shabbat. You're camping out somewhere and you need to take water out of a well on Shabbat. So you can't do it because if you take the water is resting in a private domain. You're going to take it into a public domain where you're sitting. So how can you do it? So they allowed them to do what's called pasei beraot, which is that they would make basically on right angles at the 4 corners, they would have at a perimeter, they would create like a square perimeter, have right-angled boards. Okay? And these right-angled boards make like bookends, make like corners facing each other, so that you had one going this way, one going this way, one going this way, one going this way. And so you have, 2 boards on each of the 4 directions, so to speak. because you make corners. You make 4 corners out of the two boards at each corner that are perpendicular to one another. So, and by creating this kind of enclosure, they didn't require them to put up walls or to make a complete enclosure, but that level of enclosure was considered to be enough to to allow them to remove water from the well. And let's see if they show us an example of this. Yeah. So it shows it here with cows standing. I'll explain that in a second. But this is the way this is the well, and these are the corners that they would make here. Now, the reason why they made the measurement 13 1/3 amah has to be the amount of space between here and here. It's the size of 8 oxen who would be traveling in a group. Okay? That was the size that they made. They said that amount of space is the amount of space that could be between the 2 boards on each of the 4 sides of this square enclosure that you're creating. Okay? So that's what Rabbi Yehuda said. He said that that it comes out to 13 1/3 amot. So he says the same thing for the for the space of the mavoi, that it should be 13 1/3 amot is the width that you can have. Just like over there you have 13 1/3 according to Rabbi Yehuda. Over here you should have 13 1/3. So the Gemara says, Uma pasei beraot שהתרת בהן פרוץ מרובה על העומד, לא התרת בהן יותר מ-13 אמה ושליש, מבוי שלא התרת בו פרוץ מרובה על העומד, אין עובדן שלא תתיר בו יותר מ-13 אמה ושליש. So the Gemara says, just like over there, where you were so lenient that you allowed them just to make these 4 corners, and you could carry in between the 4 corners, even though there's more empty space than there is walled space, right? There's more unopened space, uncovered space, and covered space, and yet you allowed them to carry in there. You still limited it to 13 1/3 amah. So here, in a mavoi, if majority of a mavoi is breached, you can't carry in there anymore. And so we certainly shouldn't assume that the breach could be any bigger than 13 1/3 amot. If when you're very lenient, you don't allow more than 13 1/3, when you're more stringent, you're not going to allow more than 13 1/3. That's what the Gemara is saying right now. But v'hi anotenet, but wait a second. This actually leads to the opposite conclusion, says the Gemara. Why? Because pasei beraot she'itarta behen parutz merubeh al ha'omed, lo tatir ben yoter m-13 amah v'shalish. Mavoi shelo itarta bo parutz merubeh al ha'omed, tatir bo yoter m-yud gimel amot v'shalish. I could argue the opposite and say like this, that why was it that you only allowed 13 1/3 amot in between the corners, the corner pieces, when you make that makeshift enclosure that's not really an enclosure? Why did you only allow 13 1/3 amot? Because there is so much space. Because the majority as it is open space. All you have is corner pieces. But when you have an actual mavoi, maybe it could be even wider. Alternatively, we could say, where I could throw it at you the other way. When it comes to these pasei beraot, this non-enclosed enclosure, you were lenient already. So you were lenient also to extend the gap to 13 1/3. But mavoi kalal kalalo. But we're not lenient about this kind of stuff with a mavoi at all. So maybe 13 1/3 is too big. In other words, what's the point? You can't learn anything from the case of that enclosure for the well, because it's a unique case, and we don't know whether to be more stringent than that or whether we could be more lenient than that. We just don't know.
It's not comparable.
It's not comparable. Exactly. So, Tanei Levi said, Mavoi shehu rahav esrim amah. Let's say so Levi taught a baraita that said that if you have a mavoi that's 20 amot, what can you do? Now remember, only 10 amot is the limit according to the Chachamim. 10 amot in the opening at the front. So he says, no, it's kaneb emtsa'ito v'dayo. What do? You take a pillar, you put it in the middle, and that's enough. You divide it into 2, basically. Hu tanela v'hu amarla. He taught this baraita, but then he said, "Ein halacha k'ota mishnah," that we don't follow that. So even though I'm telling you that this was taught in a baraita, it's not the accepted view. Now let me just show you what that would look like and why that would work. Okay, what is he talking about? Now he says in the end we don't do it anyway, but we want to just see exactly what it looks like. So right here. So they just have a pillar here. Now what it does is divide it into 2 pieces of 10 instead of it being 1 of 20. And that helps us out.
But for the purpose of the lechi or anything, it's still 1.
So then you would have 2. You would have 2. I think you would probably have to. I guess you would probably have to have 1 on either side then. Yeah, you would probably have to have 1 on either side because you're making it 2 mavoot by doing that.
I didn't mean that.
Because you have 1 and 2, and then so lechi for this one and lechi for this one.
Yeah, because you're dividing it into 2 basically by putting the pillar there. So, but the thing is, it's just a stick, so it doesn't work. So then it says, Ela hechi avitz, rather, what can you do? Amar Shmuel mishmed de Levi. So Shmuel said, in the name of Levi, as we turn to Yud Amud Bet, Oseh pas gavoa asara b'meshech arba amot, u'ma'amido le'orka shel mavoy. Now this makes a little bit more sense. He says, what you do is, you make a structure, a board, that's 10 tefachim high, and 4 amot long, and you put that in the front. So then what happens? It really does make a mechitza in the front of the mavoy, because it's the necessary length of a mavoy, which is 4 amot. It's got height to it. It's got thickness. It's got substance to it. So because of that, right, it makes it really a division, a mechitza. So it doesn't have to extend the entire way of the entire mavoy, but the first 4 amot of the mavoy, when you walk in, there's 2 entrances. It seems like there are 2 mavoot, and therefore, since you have 2 mavoot, you can put a lechi on either side, and you're okay, because now you have 2 instead of 1. That one that's too wide. Inami, alternatively, could Rav Yehuda, alternatively, we could do what Rav Yehuda says, because Rav Yehuda said that Mavoy Shu Rahav 15 Amah. If you have 10 amot, the doorway of the Mavoy is 15 amot, rather, more than 10, so 15. Marchik Shete Amot V'oseh Pas Shalosh Amot. What you can do is, you make a distance of 2 amot from the wall, and you put a board that is 3 amot thick. So what does that do? Technically, that's closing off 5 amot of the mavoy, because
the first case the wall is this way,
right.
the second case
This one it's going by the width of the mavoy instead of going back into the mavoy. It's going across the width of the mavoy where you enter. So when you come, you'll have a 2 amah space, a 3 amah board, and then the other 10 amot will just be open, and that's where people are really going to walk in. They're not going to walk through the small 2 amah space. They're not going to walk through the board. Okay, so you've effectively closed off these 5 amot. Even though there's 2 amot of space there, really you've effectively closed it off with that board. Okay, so because that's going across the width of the mavoy in that case. So the Gemara says, Va'amai. Why is that the way to do it? Yaseh pas ama u'mechatza v'yarchik shetei amot. V'yaseh pas ama u'mechatza. Why can't you do, instead of having 1 of 3 amot? Right? Why do you have to have 1 board of 3 amot? There's another way that you and separate and move it 2 amot from the wall. That covers 5, right? What you could do instead is do 1.5 amot and have 1.5 amot, 2 amot away from the wall, and then he says what you do is you make 1.5 amot board, and then you make a space of 2 amot and put another 1.5 amot board, right? So what ends up happening is you have 1.5 amot closed, 2 amot open, another 1.5 amot. So in total you have 5, but instead of having 1 big board, 2 amot away from the wall, you have 2 small boards, okay, that are only, oh no, that's not the case.
just save on long.
That's not the case, yeah. So basically, yeah, that's not, they don't have a picture of that case. So because here what it's saying is that in between these 2 amot, they have a picture there? Yeah, that in between these 2 amot, yeah, exactly, yeah. So you have 2 smaller pieces separated by 2 amot in between them, instead of 1 bigger piece separated by 2 amot from the wall. Okay, that's all it's saying. So why can't you do that? What do you see from that? Shemamina, omed merubeh ala parut, mishtei ruchot, lo have omed. The problem is that when you have omed merubeh ala parutz, you have to have a situation where there's more covered space than open space. Whenever you're making a structure, it has to be that way. So in our first suggestion, we said the board is 3, the open space is 2. So you have more closed space than open space. But if you do a 1.5 amah board, and then a space of 2 amot, and then another 1.5, so each board by itself is less than the space in between them.
So how could
right? It's less.
The case of the well then?
That was a special dispensation for sure. That's a special heter. That was the special heter. Was that that you have so much space, right? So you see from that if you have more space than solid, it's no good, because otherwise we could have used 2 smaller boards instead of 1 big board. But then the Gemara says no. Maybe it really is enough to have, even though you have more space than solid, it's still good. But here it's different. But the problem here is that if the first board is okay, because the first board of 1.5 is right next to the wall, but then you have a space of 2 amot, and then you have a space of 10 amot, right? Because you have a space of 2 amot between board 1 and board 2. And then between board 2 and the end of the mavoy is another 10 amot. So what happens? There's a total of 12 amot surrounding that 1 board. So that one board has more space than it to the left and to the right. That's the problem.
Right.
If it had more space than it only on one side, it might be okay. But it has more space than it on both sides. That's no good.
So that means if it was 1 and 2, then it would be okay.
Possibly, right. Right, so now the Gemara is going to suggest another possibility. So v'yaseh pas amma. So why don't we do this? Take a board that's an amma wide. V'yarchik amma. And make it one space away. Make a space of another amma. V'yaseh pas amma. V'yarchik amma. V'yaseh pas amma. So what can you do? You can put a 1 amma board, make a space. 1 amma board, make a space. 1 amma board.
Right.
Okay, so you have for every board only 1 amma. So it's even. It's even. Okay, so then the Gemara says, Shema mina. So then what would you have? Even on the last board, what's on its left is 1 amma of space, and it is 1 amma, so it's okay. On its right is 10 amot, but it's okay. It's not bordered on both sides by space larger than itself. It's only bordered on one side by space larger than itself, which is okay, right? No, those boards are actually together. They're fused together.
With
They're held together, though. Yeah, no, they're actually held together. They're tightly held together. Yeah. So Shema Mina Omed Kaparutz Asur. So what's the reason why you can't do this? So we must see that if you have an equal amount of space and solid, that's also not good, because you have board, space, and then board. So what do you have? You have equal space to board, because you have a board and then space that's equal to it. A board, space that's equal to it. That's also no good, apparently. It's got to be more board than space. So the Gemara says, no, le'olam emalach mutar. Really, we could say that even if it's equal, it's okay. V'shanei hacha, but it's different here. De'ata avira dehai gisa, u dehai gisa, umivatele. Because still we have the problem that since the last board on the edge is not more than the space next to it, and next to it is more, right? Because it's got 10 amot of space on the right, 1 amma of space on the left. It's only 1 amma. So it has to be able to overpower, so to speak, either if it's going to be bordered by space on both sides, it has to either be more space than what's on its left or more than what's on its right. But here we have equal to what's on its left, and there's more space to its right. So that's not good. So then the Gemara will try v'yarchik amma v'yaseh pas amma u'mechetza. V'yarchik amma v'yaseh pas amma u'mechetza. So why don't we do like this? Make a space between the wall of the mavoi that's one amma, and then make a 1.5 amma board. Then make another space that is 1 amma, and make another 1.5 amma board. So then what do you have? The spaces in between are only 1 amma. The boards themselves are 1.5 amot. So there are 2 boards, right? One is an amma away from the wall, and it's a 1.5 amma board. Then you have 1 amma in between that and the next board, which is 1.5 amot. Then you have the 10 amot on the other side. So now what do you have? That 1.5 amma board to its left is only 1 amma of space. It overpowers that, so it's good. To its right is 10 amot of space, right? But that we don't care about, because at least it can overpower what's to its left. So shouldn't that be enough? So the Gemara says, in hachinami, you're right. That would be fine. That case would be fine. However, but the rabbis didn't want to give you advice that you have to get 2 boards when you could do it with 1. Just get a size, 3 amma board and put it 2 amot away from the wall. Why would you have to go to the trouble of getting 2 amma and a half boards and placing them 1 amma distance from one another? What about the other problem, which is if you do this, that you put this 3 amma wide board 2 amot away from the wall, somebody might end up using the small space of 2 amot to squeeze into the mavoi. So then why don't you need like another lechi there or something? In other words, it should be a problem. So the answer is, Amar Ravada bar Matana, Rava bar Matana said, Chazaka in adam maniach petach gadol v'nechnas b'petach katan. We assume that a person won't do that. They're not going to squeeze into a tiny space when they have the huge opening of the mavoy on the right. Why would they squeeze into the little space? But what about what we learned earlier about Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi? That if you have, at the end of the mavoy, you have a breach. Let's say you have the open wide space, and then in the corner on the right side, let's say the side wall 3 tefachim is broken. You have a space, right? We said that if it's broken on the side, on one of the sides, right at the head of the mavoi, there's a big piece that's broken. So people might sneak through the corner there. They might come through the corner. Or they might go out the corner. And then even if you have a lechi or a korah at the front of the mavoi, they're not going to see it. They're not going to relate to it because they're going out the side entrance that broke through the side. So why is that any different? Why don't we say there that a person will always take the big entrance and exit? They're not going to squeeze through the side because the side broke. So the answer is, the Gemara says that no. Because over there, hatam kamima'it behilucha. There you're taking a side exit. It actually makes your walk shorter. Because you would have to walk to the end of the mavoi, instead you just slip out the side. So it's shortening your walk. But here you're standing in front of the mavoi anyway, and you have a big entrance and a small entrance. Why would you go in the small one? It doesn't cut down your walking at all. It doesn't help you. So we assume you're not going to do that. Tanan hatam, we learned over there. Or ha'asla. This is talking about a leather chair that they would use to go to the bathroom, that wealthy people would have to sit when they went to the bathroom, and basically it was made of leather straps and a hole in the middle. So if this thing can also be considered a tent, an ohel. So if, let's say, a person sits on this and underneath it is some flesh from a dead body, is the case. So we know that an ohel, a tent, spreads tum'ah. Okay? So if this is considered an enclosed tent, a tent has to be a tefach. If it's an enclosed tent, a tefach of covering, so since it's raised over the ground, if there's something under it, let's say something from a corpse and something else under the seat, it will be considered an ohel over them, and it will spread tum'ah from the dead body to whatever's under it.
So that's exactly
okay?
the same on Shabbat. I think something.
We have things like this, yeah. So this kind of seat. So the thing is that because it doesn't have a full tefach of leather, it has a strap of leather, and another strap of leather, and a space in between. So even though it's made up of space, it's still considered a tefach of ohel. We don't look at that space as interrupting the ohelness of the cover. Even though there's, well, we don't know yet. Let's see. So we're going to see that. So it says, v'halal shelo, even the opening in it, mitztarfim b'tefach, combined to create the tefach. So my ora asla amar Rabba bar Brachana Rabbi Yochanan or kisu shel beit kisei. So they explained, Rabba bar Brachana said that Rabbi Yochanan said that this is talking about a special type of seat for the bathroom. V'chama, how much of a space can you have? Ki ata Rav Dimi amar etzba'im mikan ve'etzba'im mikan ve'etzba'im revach be'emtza. He says that you can have 2 fingers breadth of strap of leather, 2 fingers on the other side, and in between 2 fingers of space. Because 6 fingers in total is a tefach. And that's enough. Even though the space inside is equal to either one of the straps. It's okay. Ki ata Ravin amar etzba mechatza mikan ve'etzba mechatza mikan ve'etzba revach ba'emtza. Ravin came and he said you can have 1.5. You can have a strap that's 1.5 fingers in width on the left. And you can have a strap that's 1.5 fingers in width on the right. And you can have a 1 etzba, 1 finger's width in the middle. It's not going to be very sturdy. Amar le Abaye le Rav Dimi, Abaye said to Rav Dimi,
I think it's to cover so that it doesn't.
it's just to hold you up.
It
It is. It's to hold you. Yeah, it's supposed to hold you. Now, that's what it seems like. I mean, he calls it the kisei shel beit kisei. It's the covering of the beit kisei. But I understood it as having some kind of structure under it. Otherwise, how could it be an ohel? It's a kisui lebet kisei. It's a covering for a bathroom, but I think it means it covers. You put it down to go to the bathroom rather than just using the ground. Right, because otherwise, why would it be? You'd need some structure to make an ohel. It can't just be a covering, right? So Abaye asked Rav Dimi, "Mi paligitu? Are you arguing?" In other words, what's the argument here? Because one is saying 2 fingers, 2 fingers, and 2 fingers. One is saying 1.5, 1.5, and 1. So one is giving you a total of only 4. One is giving you a total of 6. Amar lo ha birav revata ha bezutrata. One of us is talking about using the thumb. One of us is talking about using a pinky. If you're using a pinky, it's 6. If you're using a thumb, it's 4. We were just using a different measurement. Velo piligin. We're not arguing. Amar le. He said to him, la'aye piligitu. No, you are arguing. Abaye said to them. He's arguing with him about what he's saying about himself. He said, no, you are arguing. How so? Uba omed mirubela parutz mishte ruchot piligitu. Because look at your cases. You're arguing about a case where the omed is mirubela parutz, where you have a case where what's covered is greater than what's revealed from 2 sides. What does he mean? Because in the case where you have 2 fingers, and 2 fingers in the middle, right? There, it's equal. They're equal, right? The only way that the covered part is more than the uncovered part is if you combine them. Otherwise, they're equal. And he's talking about a case where 1.5, and 1 in the middle. So either one by itself is more than the space in the middle. Correct? Because 1.5, either one by itself. According to you, Rav Dimi, who was the first one mentioned, who said 2 fingers, and a space in the middle of 2. He said, for you, shte ruchot, even though you have to combine the 2 sides for it to be 4 etzbaim, and then it is, or etzbaot, but they call it etzbaim here. They're calling it etzbaim for 2, right? 2 fingers and 2 fingers. So even though you have to combine the 2 fingers and 2 fingers to make it more than the space, it's okay, you combine it. He says you can't combine it. But according to the other opinion, it seems like you need 1.5, and only 1 in the middle, which means to say that each one by itself has to be more than the space in the middle. So he said to him, because if you're not arguing, why doesn't he choose the following case? So why doesn't he just use a simpler case? If he wants to show that in his measurement, it only takes 4 fingers, do 1 1/3, 1 1/3, and 1 1/3. 1 1/3 strap, 1 1/3 strap, 1 1/3 strap in the middle, you have 4. And it would be equal. Why does he have to make it that it's 1.5? Why does he have to make 1.5, and 1? He could work it out differently. Ve'elamai peleginan. So Rav Dimi says, you're telling me that we're arguing. If that's the case, then I too should have suggested a different case if I wanted to make this point. Because what case could I have suggested? Etzba'u shnei shelishim mikan. A finger and 2/3 on the right. Ve'etzba'u shnei shelishim mikan. And a finger and 2/3 on the left. Ve'etzba'im u'shnei shelishim revach be'emtza. And 2 2/3 fingers in the middle for a total of 6. That's what I should have said. Why? Because if you're telling me that I hold that you can combine, that the reason why I chose the case was because I wanted to show that you had to combine.
What is the argument again?
In other words, he's saying the original argument was how the thickness of the straps versus the space in the middle. So one said a strap of 2 fingers width, and in the middle is 2 fingers of space. The other one said 1.5, and 1 finger's width of space.
But they're not arguing about it being equal. They're just arguing about.
They didn't talk about that yet. So Abaye is assuming that everyone agrees that the amount of covered space has to be more than the uncovered.
Okay.
It's just a question of whether you need to combine the two, whether combining the two counts,
okay.
or whether one each alone has to count. Right? So he says, if combining the 2 counts, then why did I say, in my case, 2, 2, and 2 in the middle? Right. I should have said 1 2/3, 1 2/3, 2 2/3. Because that would make the point even more strongly. That would make an even stronger point. Right. Because then the combining is, instead of being it equal, all 3 things equal, I would have really shown that I'm combining them, because I would have actually had to combine them to make the point. Rather, if there's really a machloket here, Rav Dimi said, it must be whether equal is enough, which is what you're pointing out. In other words, I'm saying equal is enough. 2 fingers, 2 fingers, 2 fingers, equal. Right. According to Ravin, it has to be 1.5. In other words, each piece, it's not that we're combining versus not combining. It's that I'm saying that as long as the space that's covered, in other words, the strap and the space next to it, and the strap, is the same amount. So there's 2 fingers it's 2 fingers of covered, 2 fingers of space, 2 fingers of covered. It's equal. That's enough. Yeah. Ravin is saying no. It has to be more in each one than the space. Not equal. More covered. Right. More in each strap than the space in between. So that means there's 1.5. And there's 1.5, and there's only 1 in the middle. So that way, each strap is bigger, is wider than the amount of space in the middle. But nobody's talking about combining the 2 straps to make it more. We're asking whether you need to make it more, or whether it can just be equal. I'm saying it can just be equal. 2, 2, and 2. He's saying you need 1.5 and 1.5 on the straps, so that each one is actually larger than the space in the middle.